All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you!
This is my boomstick!
What's your favorite scary movie?
What up, horrorheads, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. I'm your host, Daniel DeBona, but I'm not joined by Dave this week. I believe he's overseas in merry old England, if I have his complicated summer schedule remembered correctly. So I am joined this week by a longtime friend of the show, contributor, and all sorts of those things. We've got Michael Hunger. Hunger, how you doing, man?
What's up, guys? Long time no see. Happy to be back.
We are happy to have you back. And so Hunger and I have been working on a few things. We spend a lot of time together watching movies. And I told him the idea of, it's like, yeah, I need somebody to do space horror. And we were trying to come up with something weird and wonky and just wicked wild that we could try to find that would fit this month's theme of space horror. And we both ran across this idea of the A24 film High Life. And that's what we decided to watch. We did no research into the movie at all. We just kind of saw it on some lists and we're like, we had just finished watching The Lighthouse. So we were like, all right, we're on board with Batman in an A24 film. So let's give it a shot. So we went with High Life to do our space horror this week. So in a section that we're calling Space Horror, kind of, let's get into just kind of an overview of this movie. So, Hunger, what did you think about the movie High Life?
So, it's really hard to put into words because, as you so appropriately texted me yesterday, was what am I watching? I think is what you said, which is about the best way you can describe watching this film because it's kind of weird, but not in a bad weird way. Just it's kind of at a certain point made me think, oh shoot, did we completely whiff on this? Is this horror? Because there are aspects of it that it's just kind of like you're just kind of watching people. Besides the abject idea of being in deep space, of course they are all convicted criminals. They're on death row. That's kind of the whole point of them being chosen for this thing. So there's that whole aspect of it, certainly for the women, as is evidenced by at least one scene. But then there came the exact point where I was like, oh yeah, this definitely, I think at least this part classifies as horror, and that is Mia Goth's spaghettification.
I
certainly did not see that coming, buried there in the middle with everything else that was going on.
Yeah, I did that a lot too, where I just kind of kept staring at this movie, like wondering, is this horror, right? Like, or is it something that's just like a horrific situation that we're kind of being forced to live through with these characters? It was bizarre. I'll give it that. I mean, it's definitely heavy in that sci-fi category. There were some horrific moments, right? And it's a horrific situation that these people are in. And they definitely face some things that were scary and awful. But man, I don't know. Like this movie it was so weird without being super weird, right? Like I've seen weirder movies that felt more normal, if that makes any sense.
So the best way I could come up with to describe High Life, filmed by Claire Denis, features heavily, obviously, Juliette Binoche. And to borrow a phrase you used in our review or recap of watching the movie Trainspotting, You referred to that movie as offensively British, and I am going to refer to High Life as offensively French.
Okay. You know what? That maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that French art house style, but they went with color with it. You know, they did a little bit more.
Yeah, there's certain the scene of her writhing about while music kind of rhythmically matches her movements in a way that's interesting and disturbing. The artistic shots of bodily fluids being used, I guess, is the most polite way I can phrase that. Those stood out to me certainly. But one thing that really I thought was cool in a way that I don't think I've seen before is the portrayal of space itself. Because speaking particularly about when Robert Pattinson, I can't remember for the life of me what his character's name was. Monty, there you go. So whenever he finally cleans up, I guess, as he dumps his former crewmates out into space.
Yes.
Just the way they present that, where he's kind of, it's like there's a nothing, which space is essentially a nothing, but I've never seen space shown as a nothing like that. You know, that you can see stars and things in the background. This is almost like they're just going into a void.
Yeah.
That was very strange. The floaty void of space in the movie.
So, and by the way, I just looked this up because I was thinking that on the fly you made up the word spaghettification. That's a real damn word.
Oh, you weren't aware of spaghettification? Yeah,
I was unaware that you were being highly scientific when you just used the word spaghettification.
Yep. We're not talking flying spaghetti monster science. We're talking actual astronomic science.
Yeah, like spaghettification is the vertical stretching and horizontal compression of objects into long, thin shapes. It's caused by non-homogeneous gravitational fields. Homogeneous. So there we go. If any of those words meant anything to you, you now know that Michael Hunger just taught us the word spaghettification. So let's get into the story, using air quotes here, presented in this movie. I do believe there's a lot of plot points, but we're going to call this sometime in the very far future. Let's get into the plot, the story. These words all feel weird in this movie because it's just kind of what's going on with this guy, right? And then you get a lot of backstory. But I don't know if plot or just storyline elements are present here. Tell me what you think about that.
Well, so the first thing I thought, whenever I knew we were going to get to this at some point, the thing I found strange, because obviously this presents itself as nonlinear. It's
right.
Obviously it starts, I would say, about 3/4 of the way through the story that's presented to us. And that's kind of trying to skew the numbers based on how long they spend in certain timelines. But the thing I thought was weird about that is the fact that it starts as nonlinear and then is almost linear the rest of the time.
Right.
It almost starts with a flashback for no reason, besides to kind of set the idea that he has this child, but then spends the next, let's say, hour making you think, okay, well, how do we get to the part where he has a child? Granted, that does pay off eventually. It's just odd that they started there. But the thing I took the most humor from is whenever we both discussed when we picked this movie, the overall concept. And just to pull up IMDb real quick, the official plot synopsis as presented on IMDb is: a father and his daughter struggle to survive in deep space where they live in isolation. Which does absolutely nothing to describe what happens in this movie.
Not a thing.
As
a matter of fact, father and daughter time is probably outweighed by everything else.
Yeah, it's first 15 minutes, last 10 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe 10 minutes being generous.
Yes.
So a solid, this movie being what about an hour and a half, hour 40, something like that.
Yeah, like hour 50, hour 55, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, well less than a third of this movie follows that plot synopsis, which was interesting to me because, like you said, other than that, it really is just a cohesive string of events.
Yeah. This, like I said, it feels weird using the words plot and story. Well, I take it back. It feels weird using the word plot. Story, yes. There is a story told here. We're given the story of a bunch of criminals who were given a chance to pay their debts to society by going on a space mission to a black hole and hopefully instigating what I did go look up, the Penrose process, which is the process of using the rotation of a black hole to create energy. And they're hoping to unlock that by just launching themselves at a black hole that they're traveling at 99% the speed of light. And it's going to take them, we're told, 8 years to get there. And so basically, then it just becomes the real world in space, right? Like the criminal real world in space. We start getting the story of what it's like when criminals stop pretending and start getting real, right? I mean, that's what we're looking at here. We're interestingly never given a ton of backstory on a lot of these people. We kind of get bits and pieces through conversations here and there, but we're just kind of presented with like and here's what they did next in life and here's what they did next, and maybe there's some weird subplot of a doctor who is bound and determined to have a baby conceived and born in space and live. And this movie is just, it's an assault of story type elements that you're then allowed to kind of sit back and put together in your own way. But it's one of those things where I almost wish, I think you watched this a couple days ago. You watched this like on Sunday, I believe, right?
Yes, Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. So you've had like 3 days to process this thing. I've had 24 hours and I'm still not sure. I'm still not sure about so many things. I'm very confused. At one point, he's like, well, we're halfway there. We've only got 4 more years. And then all of a sudden it's like, here's my daughter and she's all grown up. And I was like, well, she's not all grown up, but she's a teenager. And I was like, that was a really long 4 years, just stuff like that. And I get it. Like, you don't have to make sense. This movie kind of set the tone real early that there was not going to be a lot of sense made in this. This movie's almost stream of conscience. Like, it's just kind of, here's what's going through his head. Here's what happened that kind of had something to do with this. There was just a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah, that really is the only way to describe it. Weird stuff is because it's almost, like you said, there's not much background for anyone. The most we get is Monty, of course, him being the lead. And even that is just summarized as almost, he doesn't belong here. It's there's kind of a throwaway reference to the only reason he's in prison is because he killed his best friend over a dog when he was a child.
Right.
Which I understand, based on IMDb, is based on a real life occurrence of 2 friends who killed I think it was a 7-year-old or something like that. But anyway, that's off topic. And it's just the idea that, like, that is the most background that we get, is just a throwaway line. Everything else is left to be almost interpreted. I mean, you get Andre 3000's got a wife and kid, and kind of he's doing this for them, but they don't agree with him doing it, or the wife doesn't seem to agree, at least. The doctor, portrayed by Juliette Binoche, very desperately wants to figure out artificial insemination in space. Obviously gets kind of good at it, but space is a harsh mistress.
You're right.
Which I can only imagine being absolutely horrifying from the female perspective. Again, that is not an overall horrifying thing. It's just the idea of, things we're never going to have to deal with personally as men. And then there's kind of the glancing shot of, she seems to have what I'm assuming is supposed to be a hysterectomy scar,
maybe
on her stomach. So that's kind of gave me the idea of like, okay, so that kind of feeds why she's so desperately interested in artificial insemination is that, she obviously very badly wants a child. But then it's interesting that when she finally does, she feels so guilty about it, she hurls herself into space.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, very, very weird, right? Like, just it's I don't know. Like, I kept so this is one of those movies where I took a handful of notes, but most of them are just like one or two words because I couldn't I was afraid. I was afraid to look away from the screen because even though at no point did anything like amazingly significant happen that you could have missed, I was glued to this movie trying to figure out this movie, right? Like I was trying to figure out what the thought process that goes into writing a movie like this is. I was trying to figure out kind of this is one of those movies where you just wonder, like what's going through the person's head. Occasionally we do a movie on this show where you're like, this makes me wonder if this person is just horribly fucked up and has no other outlet for this. This movie's story made me feel like somebody had just been like occasionally waking up in the middle of the night and rolling over and like writing down something that happened in a dream, like from space. It's like it's this is I'm going to attempt to pronounce her name here, right? Claire Denis, I know, but the other writer is Jean-Paul Fargo, I believe. Probably massacred that. But I can only imagine that they're laying in bed at night and, like I said, has a dream about space and rolls over and just writes like empty ship, dogs, and then goes back to sleep and like wakes up the next morning. He's like, yep, I can work with that. Wow, mon ami, or whatever, and I've been watching X-Men 97 with my son. I got a handful of French phrases, but I guess technically they're probably Cajun ones. So and the more I kind of attempted to put this together, the more frustrated I got. About halfway through this movie, I was like, you know what? I'm done trying to figure it out. I am going to now treat this as I would treat a Friday the 13th late in the series, right? I'm just going to sit back and let this movie wash over me and wonder what's going to happen next. I'm not going to try to figure anything out. I'm not going to dig deeper for things. I'm just going to kind of let this assault my senses, which this movie does, and let it ride and see where it takes me. And if absolutely nothing else, like I said, maybe, plot may not be the right word here, but this movie is a wild ass ride. I've got to give it credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a string of like you said, you're just waiting for the next thing to happen is really the only way you can describe this series of unfortunate events, I guess.
Yeah. I will say it's one thing is, if you're listening to this and you have not watched the movie, there are 2 scenes of sexual assault in this movie, one of which is very graphic, one of which is less graphic, but no less terrible, I guess is one way to think about it, right? Like but it's so bizarre the way that it's presented, because there's absolutely there's no doubt that what Dibbs does is rape Monty. I mean, she has sedated him to the point that he can't wake up, and she then has sex with him. And so, but it's odd, not saying that they presented it like in a positive light, but it was weird the way that they kind of presented that particular assault, right? Like it's shown. I think it oddly, my first thought was like, okay, this is gross. You shouldn't present assault in a way like this. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, I guess maybe it does show that there's like there's a spectrum for these things, right? That not all rapes look the same. But I don't know, man. And I think it's just because when big face guy from House of the Dragon attempts to rape Mia Goth, that's like your very traditional cinematic rape that we get there. And so while yes, it is shocking and horrible, you're used to seeing that in a movie. I think it's far less common that what we see is this style of rape outside of, something that's about like something that happened after a party or whatever. So it was, I guess it was interesting that it kind of shined a light on how these things can look different, and then did play into, I believe, the idea of why Dibs eventually just slung herself into space. So like we were saying, there's horrific things that happen in this movie, but ultimately I think the question we're going to keep coming back to is the story that's presented to us here a horror story?
Yeah, and I agree with you. That was what I'd been thinking about as I now remember the other day having the vague thought of it, and now that you've pieced it together the way you did, I agree. I think that was an intentional choice to kind of show everything, because my understanding is Denis did this as sort of this is what life is sort of thing.
Right.
Because my understanding from more things from researching was that she had initially partnered with a different writer, and they were just so diametrically opposite on their idea of life or how they wanted to present it, to the point where she basically like got so frustrated that she just fired her, or completely separated before they even got to the actual writing stage. I can't remember what specific aspects there were to it, but I do think that's why you get all the, like I said, Monty probably shouldn't be here by rights. He's not like everybody else.
Right.
You get Andre 3000, who's different in his way. You get the very obvious, I know his character's name's Ettore, and I get that from the cast list because they never mention him by name. But it's the Aegon Targaryen actor.
Man, look, before I saw this movie, I assumed that there were prosthetics other than the eye on that guy in House of the Dragon. I did not know that was just his face. That dude's face
He has a very
is bizarre.
angular face, yes.
Yeah. Like redefining angular when it comes to faces.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's, you get all these different, like you said, it's a spectrum. So we see this is the traditional violent assault, that at least we get that payoff of, hey, you tried to rape this girl, so I'm just going to stab you in the face a bunch of times.
That is true.
But yeah, so you get that traditional assault that's paid off in that way, and then you get the non-traditional one that is almost I know there's a more technical term for it, but I'm going to call it rape by science.
Okay.
Which, I'm sure she did it as a way, not necessarily intending to be a terrible person as much as she is in the moments. Probably just frustrated that, and I want to preface, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for this. I know, even though they're fictional characters, it makes me feel gross. The idea that she cannot get him to participate in the way she wants him to for her experiment, so she forces that participation, and then we really do, I think that is that related payoff, is that she just feels so disgusting about the whole idea that she takes punishment of herself on her own hands. So I think that is a very interesting part of this movie, is that it really is life's not black and white. There's gray in the middle.
Right. And so I think that as you start to kind of step away from this movie, that this movie it works like an impressionist painting, right? Where when you're real close to it, when you're in the moment, a lot of things aren't making sense, and you're kind of you just get swept up in everything. But as you step back and you start to view the entire thing as a whole, I do ultimately think that the label horror is not misplaced on this. I think that this explores what we have seen hit and miss on this show over the years, and that is the idea of just life being horrific. And while Dave and I had varying opinions on it, and After Midnight approached this and talked about how love can be horrific. We go back and we look at Antebellum, and it's like, okay, the history of America, it has horrible, horrible blemishes on it, right? So it really, it's interesting because I do feel like this is a horror movie, but I feel like it's not what a lot of people, and myself included, were expecting when presented with the idea of space horror. I kept waiting on there to be something that got onto the ship or something awful to be happening. But then I started, as the days gone by today, I've started to think about little things that are really scary in this movie. Like the idea that if the captain doesn't do a log every 24 hours, the life support systems just shut down on the ship. So when the captain has the stroke and you realize it can't just be they have to have that little, like RFID chip or whatever in their finger to be able to do it. That stuff gets scary. And that stuff is weird. The idea that you have to follow such an exacting routine in order to stay alive is something that I think is scary. The idea that you are maybe trying to, you look at Andre 3000's character, which I love the fact that he's listed on the IMDb as Andre Benjamin, which I understand is his name, but come on. But you look at oh God, where was I going with this? Oh, so you you look at the way that he is kind of approaching things, and you never really find out exactly what he did, but he seems to be an all right guy. He's not one who ever gets violent. He's not really messing with anybody. He sleeps out in the garden so he can just kind of be away from all that stuff. So you see him, and then he's thrown in there with some of these people who, we find out eventually that Dibs murdered her kids and husband. And you're like, this seems to be a wide swath of people that they're just considering criminals. So you've got the idea that some of these people might genuinely feel like they could be paying their debt to society by doing this while also making the world a better place. And then finding out, like Monty says at one point in the movie, it's no different than prison. It's no different than juvie. It's no different than the army. It's out in space. And so all of that gets really scary. One thing that scared the absolute hell out of me, and maybe you can shine some light on this if I missed something or if you have an idea here, why in the world were Mia Goth, who was
Boise.
Who was Boise, and Mink, why were they zip tied to their bed to go to bed at night? Did I miss something, or was that just
I don't think you did, because I don't remember anything particular related to it. Yeah, that is a good question. Maybe I missed something as well, because I can't imagine it would be anything medically. If you have fits when you're asleep, I can't imagine zip tying you to a bed would be the appropriate way to correct that.
Yeah,
maybe for scientific purposes, for her to be able to get things like check on assuming that they've become impregnated. Maybe it's easier to do it when they're asleep. I don't know. That is an interesting thought, because I didn't even consider it at the time.
Like that I couldn't, because it obviously doesn't seem to be based on what we know of the characters themselves, or we don't know the violence of their offenses going into this, but we do know that Dibs, the doctor, had, she calls them all, like second-rate punks and criminals. As far as we know, all Boise did was she was, a drug addict, right? We see her jumping trains and stuff like that. And so it doesn't, but then we've got the guy from House of the Dragon, Ewan Mitchell. He seems to be a violent offender, Like there seems to be no reason that he wouldn't be the one who is strapped to his bed. So I got very confused by that as a storyline element that seemed to only exist as a way to create a situation in which it would be easier for Boise to be assaulted. And that was weird to me. But like I said, I don't know. I don't know.
Now that I'm trying to piece this together with you mentioning, what'd you say his name was? Ewan Mitchell?
Yeah, Ewan Mitchell.
I'm going to try to not call him Aegon. I think it really could just come down to a commentary on the women being treated as second-class citizens.
Right.
Even though they, like you mentioned, they are all prisoners. Certainly he's the most violent of them. I would have to assume he's in for some sort of violence-related assaults or sexual perversions.
Correct.
Because the only times we really see his character is the assault scene and then the privately watching Dibs while pleasuring himself. So there's the implication of that. And I really think it just has to be the idea that the women are there for pump and dump, essentially.
Okay.
And the men are there to do the pumping. Because they get the box, or what I think is what they call it, is the they've got a masturbation machine essentially that they use for scientific purposes, and then they also
sanitary. It's got a whole car wash system that runs through it after each time somebody uses it.
God, yeah, that's. I guess thank God for that kind of science, but. Yeah, so it's they get the fun stuff. They obviously get some sort of special treatment with Dibs. To what extent that goes, it's heavily implied. I don't think it's ever directly mentioned. Besides her desperately trying to get Monty involved in the program. So I think maybe that's just what it is that we're adding this little bit of insult to injury. Is that not only are we using these women as baby factories, because they're so desperately throughout, and that's part of the horror as well, is just the abject, why do you keep doing this to us? It's not going to work. Please stop. They're trying to almost pour bleach inside themselves just to be done with it. And I think that's the best I can think of, is that it's just kind of that little extra, is not only do the men get more than you do, but they also get the freedom to walk around, and you are stuck here. We don't want you doing whatever you want to do.
Right, because they were also receiving drugs, it seemed, for their contributions. That's how they got their. I think he just called it like a treat or whatever, but it definitely seemed that they were getting some sort of drug every time they were producing a sample, if you will. And so, and I guess I didn't think about it until you said it, but as far as we know, we hear the guys talk about the sex room. We see Dibs use it, but we never hear the women mention it that I can remember. So I do wonder if that might be part of the thing where she's the only woman who has access to that because of that reason. And so it does kind of add on to that. So it's a possibility. So we've talked about a lot of names. So let's get into a section that we're calling Batman, Pearl, and Other Outcasts. And let's talk about the cast of this movie. I mean, Dave loves the term economy of characters, and I feel like it applies to this movie in just 100-fold. There are only a handful of people here that have any sort of spoken role, and even less who play into things as they happen. So what did you think about the cast here? Who stood out for you, good or bad?
Well, obviously, you got the heavy hitters. Robert Pattinson, for sure, doing, and I can't even really describe what he did because he's almost just existing.
He just existed. Exactly. He gardened his ass off.
Mia Goth certainly did what she needed to or was expected to do, being this, the druggy, just kind of I don't even want to call her like a druggy bitch, because there seemed like there was so much more to her. It's
Yeah.
like we discussed in our train spotting episode on the other podcast. It's not her fault. It's addiction's a disease. So a lot of the problems she has with being there are almost unfair. Juliette Binoche definitely very just so weird in such a compelling way.
Yes.
With Dib. I mean, just the dance, quote unquote, scene alone was mesmerizing. It's like watching a traffic accident.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't feel good about it, but I can't look away from this. And I don't know. It was just, there's something. Other than that, I mean, nobody really stood out. So those are certainly the very good standouts. Andre 3000 did a great job with the little bit that he was giving us, like I said, so very little backstory, but making it made you care about his character. This idea of he's got family back home, because no one else really has any mention of family. At least ones they haven't murdered. So it's interesting, you flesh out his relationship with his wife, the contribution he believes he's making to this greater good, or whatever you want to call it. And he just really wants to be in the dirt. He loves that garden, and I know he says it attaches him to Earth, which adds so much more to his character for only being in a couple scenes and then committing suicide off screen.
Right.
Other than that, I don't really think there's anybody that is given enough to do anything. It's almost like I remember them, they were there, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because Pattinson here, obviously has the most screen time. The movie starts with him, it ends with him. He's the through line for this entire movie. And it's interesting because the more and more I see of this guy, the less and less I refer to him as Twilight, right? Like, I still do it jokingly, but the more and more I see of Robert Pattinson, the more and more I start to find myself becoming like a Robert Pattinson defender. I do find myself kind of standing up for this guy, and watching this and The Lighthouse within a week of each other has done a lot for me to really understand how good of a damn actor this dude is. He really is something incredible. And even now, I've only seen one Twilight movie. Like, I know that there are 4, I think, but I've only seen one. And yes, he was awful in that movie. And it was the first thing I'd seen him in outside of being Cedric Diggory, which, he was great for the little bit that he had. And so for the longest time, I just always associated him with that. And I love that this guy is doing these artsy films and these dramatic films. And now, like I said, now he's Batman, and he's really getting out there and showing what he can do. And this movie, man, you're right. He just kind of existed, but he somehow managed to make that compelling. I will give him credit in the fact that I was rooting for this guy, just this against all odds type thing, and just doing his best to be a single dad in space, which is not something I planned on saying on an episode of this show. But he genuinely seemed to, care for his daughter. He really seemed to care about all these other crew members. He was really one of the only people who seemed to care about other people on the ship. He's the one who is quickly there to defend Boise, but then he's also turns around and he's the one who smacks Mink in the face with a shovel, because he really does care about everybody. He's bizarre, man. And I've now in the course of 1 week, I have seen way more sexual Robert Pattinson than I ever planned on seeing in my life. right? Like, I have seen this man sexually assaulted. I have seen him jerk off to completion. I've seen a lot of Robert Pattinson in the last week. And I can now say without a doubt that there were far more roles that I enjoyed him in than I disliked that one Twilight movie. So I start to say, okay, well, that doesn't seem to be his fault, because Water for Elephants, Lighthouse, Batman, I enjoyed his portrayals of these characters in all of these things. So it really stood out to me to see another movie where he's just trying to get by. And it was an interesting thing to watch him. And bizarrely enough, even though you watch him kind of break down repeatedly throughout the course of this movie, I never really saw this movie as your typical descent into madness space film as it concerns Monty. There were plenty of other people that happened to. And so I start to look at Monty here as and I don't start to look, we acknowledge that Monty on this side of things is the protagonist. He's the one who's going to carry this movie from beginning to end. So then I start to look for some sort of antagonist, right? I start to look for who is Monty against. And I think that ultimately the answer has got to be Dibs, right? She's just so bizarre. She's so weird. And I don't know, top of my head, I don't know anything else that Juliette Binoche has been in. She was not a familiar face to me. But the way that she presented cold, calculating doctor with a dark past, the way that none of these people mattered to her, the way that she held herself above everyone because she was the doctor and she was on a mission and she was going to do something that was going to change the world. She presented all of that in such a cold-hearted bitch kind of way that I was blown away. I thought that she was phenomenal for somebody who was at her core just seemed to be evil until she realized it. I was absolutely floored by how intrigued I was by the character of Dibs.
Yeah, I would have, besides the obvious one to say that Space is the true villain, I do think that is the right pick as far as antagonists go, because even though there's, certainly villains, she would be the primary. The core of his beliefs is just so opposite to what she represents. He obviously has such a thickening opinion of everything that's going on, the way she treats people in general, why he wants to be no part of it. He essentially seems to be there as like a support role, essentially. I'm here to fix stuff, clean stuff, do whatever, but leave me out of this, whatever you've got going on, this whole weird situation. I want no part of it. So I think that is true as far as the antagonist goes, because then the rest of the time he's, which I think is why starting with the jump forward, because you already get the idea of who he is as a person with him and this child that he's obviously so very attached to. And so to find out that it's almost, it's not like he's been forced to, he has been forced to have this child.
Right.
Let me correct myself. It's not like it's not somebody else's child. It is his child biologically. So there is that to it. It's not it's not like Ripley finding Newt in Aliens. Just to remind you, I've not seen Aliens, but I'm aware of aspects of it. So it does give you the idea of his personality, to where otherwise you might go in and you get the idea of, okay, these are criminals. And then leading up to everything else, you're thinking, okay, yeah, he's just another criminal. But you at least start with the softer side. So it tells you the way everything else is going to play out. Yeah. And to point out to your mention of his closeness with the child. That's his best friend's kid. That's why that's Pattinson's best friend's child. That's why they're so interact so well.
Oh, well, there we go.
Because apparently the child, or maybe they had two children originally, the way movies usually go. But whenever he would pick it up, it would not stop crying. So he called his best friend who had just had a child, brought her in, and adorably, whenever she stands up and starts walking, that is that child's actual first steps caught on film.
Oh my God, no way.
Mm-hmm. That was a fun little tidbit I found online.
That's interesting. So we can't talk about characters without talking about somebody who is honestly just ascending the ranks in horror royalty. I mean, we've got to talk about the fact that Mia Gypsy Mello da Silva Goth is in this movie. Mia Goth continues to intrigue me. Mia Goth continues to be an actress and a woman that I am just bizarrely drawn to. And I mean, and I can honestly say it's not all just an aesthetic thing. I mean, she is a very pretty woman, but Mia Goth, the image of Mia Goth, without the cred that she has in these horror movies, isn't going to put butts in seats necessarily. I think that every time in this movie that we get Mia Goth on screen, I think that she is giving everything she's got. She is an intense woman. At least that is what I've been led to believe through watching a lot of Mia Goth movies here in the past couple of years. I mean, since she kind of burst on the scene, you don't make a horror movie without a cameo with her right now. She continually shows up and she gives us this, whereas Robert Pattinson gives us this really diminutive is the word I'm looking for. This really diminutive idea of being opposed to something, but letting it steamroll you. Mia Goth's personality is the black mask and gasoline approach. She hates everything about this. She is making sure that everyone who can hear knows. She makes sure that not a minute goes by where she doesn't point out how bullshit all of this is. And I love that. I love that she's so aggressive about her approach to realizing how awful this entire situation is. She seems to be the one person who is outspoken and just willing to talk all the shit. Because I mean, what are they going to do? She's in jail, right? So she doesn't hold back. And I really loved the character of Boise. And I think that she did a phenomenal job, which I feel like I say every time I watch a movie with her.
Yeah, I was waiting for, trying to get the idea of how long this episode's going to go. I was thinking at one point, like, we're going to get to Mia Goth and Daniel's just going to rant. So that was a pretty tame rant on your part, I will say.
Thank you.
But yeah, you are right, though. She did do an amazing job, and I didn't mean to undersell in any way the way I described her, but I certainly don't know Mia Goth as well as you do. So in the framework of this movie alone, and I think the only other movie I've seen with her in it is Pearl.
Have you seen Pearl and not X?
No, I've seen X and not Pearl. That's what it is.
There we go. I was come on.
I was trying to remember what the name was because it's X, then Pearl, then Maxine, right?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, I have seen X. I've not seen Pearl. So that's the only Mia Goth I am coming into this with. So certainly not to undermine her performance at all. It's just for the small, almost microcosmic sample size relative to. I am aware that she has done an insane amount of movies in the last, I think it's 9 years that she's since she really started doing movies.
This year makes 11.
Oh, 11. Okay. So very much unaware until recently. but yeah, so she absolutely amazing actress, and it cannot be understated what she is doing to the horror genre.
Yeah, I mean, she continued, and it's interesting because she definitely seems to be an actress who is specifically picked for parts because of her intensity. Because you go through and you look at what she's done, and you look at X and Pearl, you look at this. She was in the Suspiria, the when Amazon redid Suspiria, and she's always kind of doing these same type of things. Now, granted, I know that she has done other stuff, but I know her from specifically these horror movie things. Infinity Pool being the other one that I've seen that she's very good in. But she always kind of, at some point in the movie, devolves into this character. But damn if she can't do crazy better than anybody has done crazy in a long time. That's why I'm so pumped for Maxine, because in X we got we got her really tame until she wasn't. Then in Pearl it was like, there's Mia Goth. And now Maxine, I think we're going to get, even further unhinged, which I'm totally here for. So, I mean, but that does pretty well sum up everybody. I mean, there are a couple other people, but they don't do anything of note, right? When you look at the cast, we get you mentioned earlier, we did get to see Mink get her revenge on a couple folks, right? Because apparently, in true prisoner style, she had a shiv under her mattress, so good for Mink. But so we need to get into a section that we're doing. While this is Space Horror Month, we have been saying this is the year of the monster. And so, we've done zombies, vampires, ghosts, right? So this is normally the section that we would call Space Monsters, where we would talk about the monster of this movie. However, upon watching, we kind of learned that there isn't a space monster in this. So in a section that we're calling Space is Empty and All the Monsters Are Here, I want us to take just a few more minutes to talk about the horror elements in this film. What makes this film scary to you?
All right. Just the true villain the entire way through: the criminal justice system.
Boom! Got him! Take that!
Yeah, so that really is, like you said, I think you said the hopefully distant future, and my immediate thought was like, I think you're really underestimating the American government, Daniel. Although
we won cricket now. We own the world.
Although it never is, it's there's so much vaguely Russian aspects to the flashbacks that it's almost hard to pin down. Is it, a unified globe kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not wrong in that, am I? That's
No.
That's what that's what I remember from it, is that it was like, I can't really pinpoint where this is from, but they do mention that, Andre 3000 is called Black in Russian. That's why he got his name.
Right.
So yeah,
with a T at the beginning.
Yeah. So it's just that this whole idea of this is what, the life could be like eventually, where we do have to resort to, like, I know we're already having a fun time with renewable resources. So the idea of having to resort to, we need to go light years out into space, and this very difficult system is what we need to do in order to have energy. It's terrifying.
Right.
Just that space is the most irrationally terrifying thing to me. It's like the idea that when I was a child, I was led to believe I would be interacting with quicksand more than I ever will.
Exactly. I have never once had to stop, drop, and roll.
We're prepared though.
But we're ready.
But I mean, what are taxes? I kind of know how to do them.
Boom! Got him again. Hunger out for governmental heads tonight.
So it's just the idea of, it's like, yeah, I'm never going to be around a black hole, but there's that 0.001% of But what if I am? I really don't want to be stretched out any more than I already am stretched out and then have my head explode. That it's the kind of thing that, like, when I see it, it makes me want to, like, stay up at night just praying that I never please don't let me run into a black hole on my way to work tomorrow. I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just the sheer intense isolation is the truly horrific part of this. Besides, you get the instances like we've talked about, the spaghettification. You and Aegon Targaryen, I'm just going to go back to it, getting stabbed in the face a whole bunch of times. And granted, you don't see a lot of it, but you see enough of it to be horrifying.
Right.
You get people getting smacked in the head with shovels. But the truly most terrifying part of it opens and closes the movie is that it's just at the heart of it. And to double back to the tagline being so very minimalist, that's the truly scary part, is the idea that he's trapped on this thing 4 years away from Earth, or however far away it is away from Earth. The numbers just do not add up well enough for me to remember.
They stop making sense very quickly. Yes.
Well, I think that's kind of the point, because obviously, like we talked about with the daughter very quickly aging, but he never ages because space.
But his clothes do get more worn when she's grown.
Yeah.
The color has faded. They're a little more toned.
And I'm sure there's some kind of science to support all this that I have no interest in ever trying to figure out and understand. I am perfectly comfortable with sitting back and saying, okay, Claire Denis, if you say so.
Well, and I mean, and there is the idea that if you were that traveling at near light speed slows the aging process, right? I believe.
Right. So obviously there's scientific basis for the things, and I'm just taking them at face value because I don't feel like thinking that much. So it's just the idea that we start and end with he's trapped on this ship, probably no way to get home. He's really just, it ends with him just kind of praying, hey, if we, like, last time somebody tried this, Mia Goth kind of exploded, but maybe if we do it right, we can head back towards Earth at least.
Yeah.
So it's just the idea of waking up every single day in this situation. And like you said, if he misses doing that log once, he's dead.
Yeah.
Because it just, also the idea that they're like, hey, we're going to set a time limit on this to where we need to have them check in, and they left it at 24 hours. It's like, we're not going to give you a couple days to get things figured out. It's like, I guess that's the true way to force them into, we need to make sure you're doing this, and as soon as you slack off, we're not wasting any more energy on keeping you alive.
Right.
So yeah. It's just like classic government just launching this out there, and we're fine with losing the money if we don't have to deal with it anymore.
Yeah, I think that you summed it all up there really well. I think that we look at the idea of, yes, the emptiness of space being horrifying. We look at the nature of some people. The fact that there are people in this world who do truly are just villains. That there are people who are irredeemable when you look at, at Aegon Targaryen. And his face, man, that face. He's you look at a character like him, and it's like, this guy sucks. I don't know anything about this guy, and he sucks. He's scary. This is a movie where you can extract horror ideals. This is a movie where you are presented occasionally with something that is very scary looking. And yes, I'm loving the word spaghettification. The spaghettification of Mia Goth is well done and terrifying, and goes a long way to sell the idea of this movie being horror. It's interesting because knowing what movies we have coming up, we'll get to that at the end of the episode, and looking back into doing Life Force last week, we were looking specifically, when we set out to do this, for movies that had some sort of space monster, something that you could fight against. when you look at this movie, it only gets scarier when you realize that what you're fighting against is the terrifying idea of, like you said, isolation. I am a person who with you and with Dave records multiple podcasts a week. I host things in town. I stay on a microphone. I stay around people. I hate the idea of being alone. I can't stand it. I don't know how there are people who successfully live alone. It drives me insane. So being in space and having to then make myself socialize with these people that I don't know or like that much is awful to me. That's a personal one, but I do think that there's a lot of scary stuff here. It's just presented in a very non-traditional, scary way. And it takes some time to really let this movie settle into you to determine what's really scary about it. So I'm not saying it's going to be a horror classic, but I also don't think it's a complete and total misnomer to say that this is a space horror movie, even though it didn't quite fit the theme of being a space monster. I do think that we definitely got some horror elements here.
But Daniel, the true monster was inside us all along.
What if the monster is the friends we make along the way? So, I mean, that's gonna do it. This movie, if you've been listening and you're confused, don't worry, we are too. This man is 72 hours removed. I'm 24 hours removed. We're confused too. Give it a watch, but it is time where we get to a chance to rate this movie. Now, here on Shiver, we don't rate movies against each other. We've referenced a lot of Mia Goth's other works, a lot of Robert Pattinson's other works, things like that. But we're not comparing High Life to any of those. When we go to rate a movie, we create a unique rating system for every single movie. And so that allows us to judge a movie only by the merits of what it is bringing to the screen at the time. Hunger, as the guest, you get to pick the metric for what we will be rating. So what are we going out of a possible 5? What?
Man, I don't feel great about this, but
okay.
The words I'm about to say are words I'll be 34 in July. So almost 34 years of my life. 2 words, 3 words if you don't count one as a compound word. Words I never thought I would string together in a serious manner. And I can honestly say I never thought at any point in my life going forward I would have another reason to string these words together. So I need to take the opportunity. I think that we should rate this out of 5 artful cum shots.
Roger that. So, Hunger, out of a possible 5 artful cum shots, what do you give High Life?
Man, there is, for everything that is confusing and difficult to follow, there's something that really balances it and makes this such a weirdly compelling movie that, like I said, I don't want to look at parts of it, but I can't help myself. It's so well, the characters, as we mentioned, are amazing, but it's just, it's beautiful in a disgusting way. But there's so much that I have to take away. I don't know. This is difficult, and I don't feel good about it because I think this probably deserves more than 3.5. But I don't think I can give it more than 3.5 for how much that we've really had to unpack. You know what I mean? It's for a movie. Like I said, like you said, I'm 3 days removed. And for there to be so much that we have to go back and rationalize or go back and try to understand in a more complete way. For it to be this weird and interesting, I don't, you know what I mean? It's difficult to describe it. It certainly is a thinking movie, but I also shouldn't have to think that hard. And I think that's what the main takeaway from it.
Okay. Well, look, I'm right there in that same camp with you, right? Because I know I can't go 4 because I just immediately I'm like I don't know that many people that I would on top of my head. It's like I can't just start like rattling off a handful of people that I would recommend this movie to. But I know that I can't go lower than 3 because while this movie does plant its own head firmly up its own ass multiple times with its artsy imagery and some things like that, it also does pull it out for bright moments of clarity. But I think that ultimately the way you said it is that for something to be rated higher than 3.5, I need to not have to sit down and unpack so much. Or when we do sit down and we peel back layers, I need it to be aha moments, which does occasionally happen on this show. Occasionally I'll be talking something through, Dave, somebody will be talking something through, and then when I hear it, it clicks and that switch is on and it does so much. For talking about this movie for an hour, I feel like we've never had a definitive moment where we were like, oh my God, now it makes so much sense. Now I get this. Now I get that. We didn't really have that happen in this film. And so I am going to sit comfortably at 3.5 as well, because I did like it. I really did like it. When it was over, I wasn't upset that I had watched it. I wasn't mad that it had been created. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed what I got here for what it was. But I was so confused by so much of it that ultimately I can't go much higher than that. And yeah, this is not going to be one that I feel like is going to come up in conversations or that I'm going to throw out to people a lot. And so I'm going to go with 3.5 artful cum shots as well.
Yeah,
So
this like you said, there really is. Because no, I feel good about having watched it. I'm glad that we had this opportunity, that you invited me to do this episode. You said space horror. I googled the word space horror, found that list that had High Life on it. I'm glad I watched this movie. I enjoyed it very much, but that's in the vacuum of we had a reason to.
right.
And like you said, I would in no way recommend this to anybody, besides obviously if you're listening to this episode of the podcast and you want to understand what we're talking about.
Right.
Certainly do. But other than that, there's not really a clear enough message or a point to it that I would say, oh, you really need to check out this movie, High Life. It's got some interesting things to say. Because like we said several times, we don't know what it's saying most of the time. The closest thing to an aha moment we had was when I kind of processed it, like, oh yeah, the women are second-class citizens. The guys are just there for the fun part. Yeah. But even that's just my knee-jerk speculation. It's not a knee-jerk, oh my God, this is what it is.
Right.
That's me trying to rationalize it because you put me on the spot with trying to rationalize it. So it's certainly an enjoyable movie, but not one that I would seek out or recommend anyone to seek out.
Exactly. So, if art, super artsy space and breaking stuff down, I will say, I do hope that Dave gets around to watching this one. There's his feminist ideology is deeper than mine, and maybe we'll get him to take to Instagram once he watches it and say what he can break down about it. But he will be back next week, so make sure you join us. Thank you to everybody who was listening as the episode's gone on. I know it was a weird one, but it's a weird movie. That's going to happen sometimes. So make sure you head to shiverpod.com, where you can find links to all of our social media. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those things at ShiverPod. And you can watch us live every Wednesday at 9/8 Central. We will be continuing the month of the Year of the Monster with space horror monsters. And there is a definitive monster, kind of, in the next one. As next week, we will be doing a movie that for 2 years, Dave and I have been talking about doing and finally have got it on the docket. Next week, we will be deep diving Event Horizon, the movie that traumatized so many of us, if you're right around our age. So make sure you tune in next week and check that out. If you want anything to say, if you've got this movie, if we missed something huge, you can email us, shiverpod@gmail.com, or the Instagram DMs. Those both come through pretty quickly. We really appreciate everybody listening. Hunger, what do you have going on right now that you need to tell people about?
Not a whole lot. I mean, as always, got trivia on Mondays at the Gray Lady. So if you're in Tuscaloosa and you're hearing this, stop by. It's 521 Greensboro, right around the corner from the Bama Theater.
Across the
kind of
street
trying to get
Bama Theater.
Across the street, yeah, catty corner from the Bama Theater. That's the right terminology,
Yes.
right? Catty
Yeah,
corner.
yeah.
Diagonally. There we go. That's a more concise way of saying that. But yeah, I've been pretty busy, but I'm trying to get back into the habit of writing my own questions instead of using the ones that are pre-written for us. So just follow me at Tallboy Trivia, Facebook and Instagram to keep up with that. I've got some fun ideas for things, sports movies coming up. I realized in 4 years I've never done a Brooklyn Nine-Nine trivia. So that'll be coming soon. And very excited for later this summer whenever, Daniel, you rejoin me behind the table for Name That Tune trivia.
That will be happening probably late July. Yes, very excited about that.
Hopefully it'll be another fun time. And then, of course, if you want, you can follow at After All These Years Pod on Instagram to keep up with the little side hustle that Daniel and I have going.
Yes, where we do other movies, occasionally horror, but we discuss movies that somehow after all these years, one of us has not seen, and that should be going live soon. If you're listening to us, it will actually be releasing on this feed, so we're going to shove it in your face, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So keep an eye out for that. We have got a couple episodes in the can. That should be the release date for that is very, very soon. So check that out. Follow us on all the things. Stick around for more Space Monsters for a couple weeks. And if you've enjoyed having Michael Hunger on, have I got great news for you? He is going to be a regular host with me, as Dave has decided that he's going to jump in the car and drive all over this great country in July. So if you are watching us live, you can see under his name here, he is our resident kaiju. And so in honor of Michael Hunger doing the month of July with us, and it was his recommendation when we put it out to y'all for what monsters we should do, July is going to be kaiju month. So we're going to be coming up with some great stuff to do during that. So make sure you check us out. We appreciate everybody for listening. Hope you have all enjoyed. And of course, as Dave always says, fright you very much.